If someone had told me that a phone call in the middle of the night could rip my life in half, I probably would have scoffed. But that night I heard my mother's screaming. A scream that haunted me for years to come. In just a few fleeting minutes, the world I cherished was blown away like ashes in a storm. And from that moment on, I was never an innocent child again. My name is Ava Bennett. I grew up in a small teal-colored house in the suburbs of Savannah, Georgia. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had everything that mattered most. Love, laughter, and dreams growing bigger every day. My father, Matthew Bennett, was the greatest man I ever knew. Starting with nothing, he founded Bennett Freight Services with just 3 battered old trucks. I still remember the days he came home, his jacket stained with grease, his eyes sparkling with pride, after fixing a broken engine himself. My mother, Claire, worked as a manager at a small cafe in town. She often complained about the hard work, but whenever she looked at my father's smile, she would quietly return one of her own. I loved that simple life. The cozy family dinners, evening walks under sprawling oak trees at the park, and most of all, our weekend ice cream trips. A tradition my father never missed, no matter how busy he was. When I turned 9, my father's business began to thrive. He secured a major contract transporting goods for a regional supermarket chain. Within a year we moved into a brand new 2-story house, complete with a sprawling backyard and a small bridge over a sparkling pond. That was when I finally had my own room. I painted it lavender, strung fairy lights across the ceiling and plastered the walls with drawings I made myself. The massive bookshelf my father built still bore small scratches from my clumsy decorating. My mother soon quit her job, just as she had always promised. She said she could finally become a real housewife, caring for the family she had long dreamed of. But instead, she gradually disappeared. From our dinners, our evenings, the little moments we once shared, she was always busy. At the salon, out shopping, meeting friends, buying luxurious things our family didn't truly need. Still, my father never let me feel alone. Every Sunday, without fail, he took me out for ice cream, sitting for hours just to listen to me ramble about math homework, school friends, or whatever nonsense seemed vital to me at the time. In his eyes, nothing about me was ever trivial. He made me feel like I was his whole world. I remember so vividly the last afternoon we spent together. It was a sunny day, the breeze light and cool. We sat on our familiar park bench, each holding a cone of ice cream. My father laughed while telling me about a rushed delivery he had to cover for a sick driver. "Can I come with you, Dad?" I chirped excitedly, eyes shining. He chuckled, ruffling my hair, his voice low and warm. "Not this time, Princess. It's a long overnight haul, but I promise I'll be back before you know it." I hugged him tightly that night before bed, whispering, "I love you, Dad." I had no idea it would be the last time I ever said those words to him. The next morning, before dawn, I heard his truck engine rumble to life and fade into the mist. I lay in bed, pulling the covers over my head, a vague gnawing fear curling in my chest. At exactly 2:38 a.m., the phone shattered the silence. I heard my mother's blood-curdling scream and shot up in bed. There was the sound of something crashing, her wails tearing through the house. I ran out of my room, my heart hammering. What happened after is a blur. Police officers. Flashing red lights. Muted whispers. Head-on collision. Died instantly. Didn't feel a thing. My mother collapsed on the couch, sobbing violently. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, numb and shivering. They said a large cargo truck had lost control on the interstate, blocking the road, and my father, my hero, didn't stand a chance. The day of his funeral, a light drizzle fell. I stood before the closed casket, unable to believe the man who once carried me piggyback through our backyard now lay inside. My mother wailed and clutched the casket as if trying to drug it back. Back then, I thought it was raw grief. Now, looking back, I know it was just the opening act of a nightmare far crueler than I could imagine. After the funeral, I naively believed the worst was over. I was wrong. Losing my father was just the beginning of a darker spiral through my childhood. My mother, Claire, was no longer the gentle woman who once read me stories under the porch. Just days after the funeral, she became someone else entirely. Cold, sharp, and greedily unrecognizable. I vividly remember that first afternoon after burying my father. She spent hours on the phone, her voice steely and metallic. "I'm the sole heir. That's right, all the shares of Bennett Freight Services now belong to me," she said, loudly into the phone, not even bothering to lower her voice, though I sat quietly nearby, doing homework. I looked up, heart pounding. My father's company, his blood, sweat, and dreams, now belonged to someone who neither understood nor cared about his legacy. Within 2 weeks, my mother fired the entire old management team. People who had been loyal to my father, who had once treated our family like their own. No thank yous, no second thoughts. In their place, she hired a pack of so-called consultants, men in sharp suits and flashy cars, whose mouths spewed nothing but hollow buzzwords. "We're going to restructure the entire business model," one bald man, who called himself the strategy director, announced loudly in the living room, the same room where my father once fixed shipping logs late into the night. "Bennett Freight needs a total makeover if it's going to survive." I was 11 years old. I didn't understand corporate jargon, but I knew something was terribly wrong. The changes came like a hurricane. The old but reliable trucks were sold off, replaced with expensive, impractical new models. The stable routes my father had spent years building were uprooted. Longtime clients began pulling their contracts. I overheard heated phone calls, angry customers demanding explanations, truckers furious over pay cuts and brutal schedules. Some even came to our house, desperation burning in their eyes. "We've got families to feed," a man named Mr. Carter shouted through the living room window. "You're destroying this company." My mother laughed coldly and slammed the window shut. Maria, the nanny who had cared for me since I was a baby, would just shake her head sadly every time another truck disappeared from the lot. "Your daddy must be heartbroken watching from heaven, Ava," she whispered once, folding my clothes. I didn't answer. I couldn't. A lump of grief choked my throat. Only 6 months after my father's death, Bennett Freight Services, once the backbone of regional transportation, was crumbling. Unpaid bills stacked high. Contract cancellations flooded in. Truckers, office staff, accountants, all walked away, one after another. I watched them pack their desks, faces weighed down with sorrow. Some even paused to look at me, the little girl they once lifted onto their truck cabs. Their eyes filled with silent regret. All I could do was clutch my worn-out doll, standing at the window, the crushing helplessness drowning every breath I took. Not long after that, another piece of news shattered the last fragile hope inside me. My mother decided to sell the company. "We need a fresh start," she declared coldly at dinner, with only me sitting silently at the table. "All that old stuff is just dragging our lives down." I clutched the edge of the table, whispering, "That was Dad's dream." Mother scoffed. "What good are the dreams of the dead? Living is what matters." She sold Bennett Freight Services to a private investment firm for a rock-bottom price. A number so disgracefully low that even I, an 11-year-old child, could see it was a blatant betrayal of my father. On the day of the signing, my mother wore a flaming red dress, heavy makeup, and smiled brightly for photos with the men who bought the company. Meanwhile, I stood on the porch, watching the Bennett Freight Services sign being taken down, feeling as if every cell in my body was being ripped apart. That evening, I asked my mother, "What are we going to do now?" She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Go shopping, and find a better life." I quietly returned to my room, staring at the pale lavender wall, where the glow-in-the-dark stars my dad and I once stuck had long faded. Inside me, something shattered. Something that could never be repaired. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. The real collapse was still lurking just outside the door, along with the unfamiliar faces my mother was preparing to bring in to replace my life. The emptiness inside the house grew bigger every day, like a crack running deep through the foundation. I thought nothing could be worse than losing my father and watching my mother destroy everything he built. But once again, I was wrong. My world was about to collapse, fast, brutal, and without warning. One early summer evening, my mother came home with a strange manic gleam in her eyes, and a strange man walking beside her. That man was Richard Hayes. Tall, overweight, dressed in ridiculously flashy clothes, wearing a fake smile that barely clung to his face. "Ava, this is Richard, and I have wonderful news," she announced, her voice dripping with crazed excitement. "We got married last week in Miami." I froze in place, feeling like I had just been slapped. "Your new father will help us become a complete family," she continued, ignoring the horror etched on my face. "I don't need a new father," I blurted out, my voice trembling with rage. Richard's smile hardened into an unpleasant sneer. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of mint and cheap wine. "Listen here, kid, I make the rules in this house. If you want a peaceful life, you better learn to obey." I clenched my fists, fighting back tears. Deep inside, I knew the nightmare was only just beginning. A few days later, it wasn't just Richard invading my life. It was his entire family, crashing into our home like an unstoppable storm. Gloria Hayes, Richard's mother, a scowling woman whose eyes picked apart everything she saw. Janet Hay, his sister, shameless and snide, glaring at me like I was a blemish on their perfect world. And worst of all, Madison, Janet's 12-year-old daughter, always strutting around like a princess, treating me like a servant. Within a week, the house I grew up in became unrecognizable. Gloria ordered all the living room furniture replaced, claiming that old style was suffocating. Janet turned my father's study into a yoga room. Madison dumped her clothes and toys all over the house, turning it into a chaotic mess. I clung desperately to my bedroom, the last sanctuary that still held a trace of my father. The pale lavender walls, the fairy lights, the bookshelf he had built with his own hands. They were the only fragments of memory I had left. But even that was soon ripped away. One afternoon after school, I walked into the house and felt a chill run down my spine. Madison was dancing around in my room, surrounded by wide-open suitcases. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Madison spun around, smirking. "Mom said I could have this room, it's bigger. You're moving into the tiny one down the hall." I looked around, my books thrown across the floor, photos of me and Dad scattered like trash. The bookshelf he had built was dismantled, broken into pieces in the corner. A wave of pure fury surged through me. I lunged at Madison and we tumbled to the ground, pulling hair, scratching, screaming. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Billy, Richard, and my mother burst in, dragging us apart like feral cats. "Enough!" Richard roared, his face crimson with rage. "Ava, you're acting like an animal." My mother didn't defend me. She didn't even ask what had happened. Instead, she slapped me hard across the face, her eyes blazing with anger. "Go to your new room, and learn your place," she hissed. Richard grabbed my arm roughly, yanking me down the hall. They locked me in the tiny guest room. Cold, damp, windowless. They only opened the door for school in the morning and bathroom breaks at night. I curled up in the corner, my pillow soaked with tears, listening to Madison blasting music in what used to be my sanctuary, while my mother laughed downstairs with Janet as if nothing was wrong. In that moment I realized I had lost everything. My father, my family, my home. And now, my entire childhood. But I didn't know yet that this pain was only the prelude to an even more brutal betrayal. The following months were an endless nightmare. I lived like a ghost in the house that once was my haven. Every day I tiptoed around, trying not to make a sound, not to draw attention, not to provoke Richard or Gloria. But no matter how careful I was, it was never enough. Richard found every excuse to torment me. He screamed over the smallest things: a towel not folded right, shoes not perfectly aligned by the door. Each time, he would grab my arm, squeezing so hard bruises bloomed instantly. And my mother? She just watched. Not a word. Not a flicker of pity in her eyes. Lola Ohayen brum belittled me in front of others. That girl has bad blood, Gloria said loudly every time guests were around. Born from lowly roots, completely impossible to educate. As for Madison, spoiled like a princess by her mother and grandmother, she grew crueler by the day. She hid my school books, smeared glue on my chair, and once even poured soapy water into my sneakers. I used to believe that if I endured long enough, they would change, that my mother would come to her senses. But one night, I realized just how naive I had been. It was a rainy Saturday night. I couldn't sleep, curled up in my dark, cage-like room. Laughter floated up from the living room, sneaking through the crack under my door. Curious, I crept out, my bare feet silent on the freezing hallway floor. I stopped at the top of the staircase, hiding behind the wall, and listened. Richard's voice rumbled first, hoarse and laced with malice. "The girl is getting more disrespectful. I told you she doesn't belong in this family." Gloria snorted coldly. "Keeping her here only ruins the atmosphere. Madison's scared to even share the same roof with her." My mother. At first she stayed silent. I held my breath, hoping she would defend me. Stand up like a real mother should. But then she spoke. Her voice chillingly gentle. "Maybe. It's time to find her another home." A heavy silence fell. I could almost hear the sound of my heart cracking in my chest. "You mean, put her up for adoption?" Janet asked, a hint of smugness in her tone. "Yes," my mother replied without the slightest hesitation. "She's still young enough. It would be better for everyone." I gripped the banister so hard my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. Each word they spoke sliced into me like a cold, sharp blade. "I know a few orphanages that take kids her age," Gloria added sweetly, her voice dripping with poison. "We can arrange it quickly." Richard let out a dry, cruel laugh. "Finally, we'll get our peace back." And my mother, the same woman who once cradled me through fevers, who taught me to spell my first words, simply sighed in relief, as if shedding a heavy burden. I turned and ran, my heart hammering, tears pouring uncontrollably down my face. I stumbled in the darkness, scraping my knees, but I didn't dare make a sound. I curled up in the corner of my tiny room, pulled the blanket over my head, and shook with silent sobs. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating in my mind, "They can't do this. They can't. Mom wouldn't leave me. Mom wouldn't." But a part of me, the part already shredded by years of suffering, knew it wasn't hope anymore. It was just a lie I clung to for survival. That night, I didn't sleep. I counted every tick of the clock, every raindrop tapping against the window. Each sound was a death knell for the last fragile pieces of my heart. I swore to myself, if they truly intended to throw me away like some broken thing, I wouldn't let it happen easily. I would fight, even if I had only a shred of strength left, even if the whole world turned its back on me. Because I had already lost my father. I had already lost my home. I would not let them take away the last remnants of my dignity. My 13th birthday arrived under a suffocating, gloomy cloud. No birthday cake, no balloons, no friends gathered in laughter like before. My mother, Claire, begrudgingly hosted a sad family dinner in the cold dining room. The table was lined with a few cold dishes and the faces I wished I could erase. Richard, Gloria, Janet, and Madison. I sat there, arms folded tightly, throat choked. Deep down, I knew, today would not be an ordinary day. The doorbell rang, slicing through the heavy air. I held my breath. And then I saw Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren, my father's brother and his wife, walk through the door. Uncle Ethan was still tall, wiry but steady, with sorrow weighing heavily in his eyes. Aunt Lauren wore a deep blue coat, clutching a small gift wrapped in shimmering silver paper. When she saw me, she smiled softly. The only genuine smile I'd seen in months. "Happy birthday, Ava," Uncle Ethan said, pulling me into a gentle hug. I nearly broke down right then in his arms. But that fragile joy lasted only a fleeting moment. My mother stood up, the screech of her chair harsh and jarring. She cleared her throat, her eyes darting away from mine, as if I were some burden she couldn't shed fast enough. "I'm glad you both came," she began, her voice syrupy and fake. "Actually, there's something important I need to discuss." The room instantly grew colder. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. "Ava no longer fits into our new life," my mother continued, speaking of me as if I were an outdated piece of furniture. "Our family needs peace and she's just too difficult." I stared at her. No shame, no hesitation. "I think," she said, glancing quickly at Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren, "since you don't have children, maybe you'd like to adopt Ava." That sentence, in that moment, pierced me like a velvet-wrapped dagger. On my birthday, a day every child dreams of feeling loved, my own mother was discarding me like defective merchandise. The entire room went dead silent. Madison smirked. Richard crossed his legs, tapping his fingers on his knee. Gloria watched me like she was waiting for me to break down and beg. I didn't mind. I just stared at my mother, the woman who once held me during thunderstorms, and silently asked, "Who are you? When did you become so heartless?" A loud crash echoed as Uncle Ethan shoved his chair back, knocking it over. "We're taking Ava home," Uncle Ethan said, his voice full of a fury I had never heard before. "And let me make this clear, Claire. You're no longer her mother from this moment on." Aunt Lauren quickly wrapped her arm around my shoulders, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart, we're taking you home." My mother crossed her arms and shrugged. "Fine, one less burden." No goodbye hug. No apology. Not even a backward glance. Richard lifted his wineglass and clinked it lightly with Gloria and Janet, as if sealing a successful business deal. I stood up, holding my head as high as I could, clutching tightly the small gift Aunt Lauren had brought me. The last remnant of my pride. Before stepping out the door, I heard Madison's mocking voice behind me. "Those officially mine now." Her and Janet's giggles echoed down the hallway, sharp and cold as blades slicing into every inch of me. Uncle Ethan took my hand and led me through the hallway and out to the front yard. The Savannah night drizzled softly, each raindrop piercing like ice into my bones. I didn't look back, not even once. When the car door shut behind me, I knew I had just walked out of hell. And this time, I swore to myself, I would never let anyone drag me into the abyss again. That night's drive took me to a different world. A place where, for the first time in so long, I felt like I mattered. Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren's house sat in a quiet northern corner of Savannah, filled with the scent of jasmine and the soft whisper of wind against the white picket fence. It wasn't a big or fancy house, but every brick and window radiated warmth. A kind of warmth I thought I would never feel again. The next day, they officially filed adoption papers for me. The process moved heartbreakingly fast. My mother, Claire, signed without reading a word, never showed up in court, never sent a message. When the judge declared I was now legally the daughter of Ethan and Lauren, I cried. But they were tears of liberation, no longer terrified of abandonment, no longer haunted by feeling unworthy of love. They treated me like blood. Not with grand gestures or flowery words, but with steady patience. With proud smiles when I brought home an A. With cheering voices when I won a speech competition at school. "You don't have to fight to be loved here, Ava," Aunt Lauren whispered once, holding me tight. "We loved you from the very first moment." With their unwavering support, I began to thrive. I threw myself into my studies, as if making up for all the lost years. I joined the book club, the volleyball team, the student council. Everything I once only dared dream about. And for the first time, no one mocked me. No one pushed me down. At 17, I was accepted into the honors program at Riverside Prep, the most prestigious private school in the area. When the acceptance letter came, I rushed into the house waving it like a trophy. Uncle Ethan read it over and over while Aunt Lauren hugged me so tightly her eyes welled up with tears. They never missed a single event. Every parent-teacher meeting, every academic award ceremony, every little volleyball match. Every time I stepped onto a stage to receive an award, I could hear the loudest cheers coming from the corner of the stands, where they always waited for me. I grew up, bathed in unconditional love, and it pulled me out of the abyss I had once been drowning in. When college application season came, Uncle and Aunt had quietly saved enough money for me to choose any school I wanted. I chose to major in finance at the State University of Georgia, dreaming of one day building a solid career, just like my father once dreamed. College wasn't easy. The pressure was intense, the sleepless nights brutal, the exams nightmarish. But I never allowed myself to fall apart. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought of Uncle Ethan's steady gaze, Aunt Lauren's reassuring grip, and the long hard journey I had fought through to earn this chance. 4 years later, I graduated with honors, ranked in the top 5% of my class. On graduation day, as I stood on the stage receiving my diploma and looked out into the crowd, I saw them, both crying with pride. Aunt Lauren waved wildly, and Uncle Ethan held up a handmade sign that read, "Proud of you, Ava." I had made it. But it was only the beginning. Right after graduation, I received a job offer from Morgan & Blake Investments, a major financial firm based in Atlanta. The starting salary stunned me. A number the little Ava locked in a dark room once wouldn't have even dared to dream of. With my first paycheck, I immediately bought 2 gifts. A handcrafted leather watch for Uncle Ethan, and a delicate pearl necklace for Aunt Lauren. When I handed them the gifts, I whispered, "Without you two, there would be no Ava today." Aunt Lauren cried. Uncle Ethan pulled me into his arms. And after so many years, for the first time, I truly felt whole. I continued to climb the career ladder, step by step, refusing to quit, refusing to slow down. Each promotion, each achievement, was a silent answer to those who once treated me like a burden, who had coldly thrown me away. I didn't just survive. I lived. And I lived brilliantly. But I didn't know yet that a ghost from my past was quietly finding a way back into my life. Just when I thought I had finally found happiness. My life entered a whole new chapter at 25. The year I got engaged to the most wonderful man I had ever met. Daniel Carter. A young, talented attorney, with a warm smile and eyes full of unwavering trust. We met at a financial seminar in Atlanta, and from that very first day, I knew he was the one I would build my future with. Daniel proposed on a quiet beach at Hilton Head Island, under a blazing red sunset. When he knelt down, hands trembling, holding out the ring, I cried and said yes before he could even finish asking. In the months that followed, Aunt Lauren and I threw ourselves into wedding planning. We chose to hold the ceremony at Meadowbrook Estate, a historic estate covered in lush greenery and wildflowers blooming along every path. Everything unfolded perfectly, filled with laughter and overwhelming joy. Until a name from the past suddenly reappeared, dragging with it a storm I never saw coming. One evening while I was sitting with Aunt Lauren working on the guest list, my phone buzzed. A Facebook message from a stranger. "Dearest Ava. It's Mom. I heard you're getting married. I miss you so much. We've lost too much time already. Please give me a chance to be part of your special day. I've changed. I love you very much." My hand froze, my eyes glued to the screen, as if it had turned into a venomous snake. I didn't need to ask who Mom was. Claire. Rage and nausea surged simultaneously. The woman who had coldly thrown me out of her house on my 13th birthday, now sending me sweet, fake words? I handed the phone to Aunt Lauren. She read it quickly, her face turning cold. "I saw her at the market yesterday," Aunt Lauren said softly. "She didn't even ask about you. But when I mentioned you're getting married and how successful you've become, her face changed immediately." I gripped my pen tightly, my knuckles turning white. "And there's more," Aunt Lauren continued, her voice low and heavy. "I heard Madison. She got pregnant at 19. Her husband's no good, unemployed. Their whole family is drowning in debt." I let out a dry, hollow laugh. Of course. It wasn't because they missed me. It wasn't because they loved me. It was because they smelled money. I picked up my phone, typing each word like a knife. "Claire, let me be clear. You are not my mother. You lost that right long ago." "Huh? The night you gave me away like discarded trash. I have a real family now. They chose me, loved me unconditionally, something you never did. Don't contact me again. I don't want to see you at my wedding. Ever." I hit send, then blocked her. No hesitation. No regret. I sat still for a few moments, feeling something lift from my heart. Like shedding an invisible chain that had bound me for years. It was over. Decisively. No more lingering hopes. No more delusions that someday she might truly regret it and love me like a real mother. That night, Daniel held me close and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Ava. Not because you're strong, but because you chose yourself." I rested my head against his shoulder, and for the first time in so long I felt completely at peace. But I didn't know yet. Claire wasn't the type to give up so easily. She would bring her entire broken family to the gates of my wedding, creating a scene I could never have imagined. My wedding day unfolded beneath a perfect, brilliant blue sky, as if the universe itself was blessing a new beginning. Meadowbrook Estate was bathed in sunlight, wildflowers blooming brightly along the stone paths, and soft music floating from a small string quartet in the garden corner. The air carried the sweet scent of lavender, drifting gently in the breeze. I stood in the bridal room, wearing a pure white gown, simple yet elegant, carefully chosen with Aunt Lauren during those joyful, busy days. Aunt Lauren squeezed my hand, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You're incredible, Ava. You've overcome so much to stand here today." I smiled, feeling my heart pound, but no longer with fear. No more anxiety. No more bleeding wounds. A soft knock at the door. Uncle Ethan peeked in, his face brimming with pride. "Ready, princess?" I nodded, tears glistening in my eyes. Not out of sadness, but because I knew I was truly, unconditionally loved. I looped my arm through his. The man who had walked every painful step with me. Who had lifted me up every time I stumbled. And we stepped out. The music swelled. Everyone stood, turning to watch. At the end of the white-carpeted aisle, Daniel stood waiting, dressed in a silver-gray suit, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw me. Every step I took toward him was a step away from the darkness of my past. But just before I reached the altar, a commotion broke out at the gate. A security guard hurried over, whispering to the wedding coordinator. I narrowed my eyes, my stomach sinking, a familiar dread rising. I turned my head slightly, and I saw them, Claire, Richard, and a scruffy teenage boy, undoubtedly her later-born son, yelling from outside the iron gates, being held back. I caught fragments of the shouting. "Ava, you can't do this. I'm your mother." Richard bellowed too. "We need you. Family is forever." I felt the weight of every eye on me. Daniel gently squeezed my hand, his eyes asking silently, "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and turned my back on the gates, turning my back on those who had once discarded me so cruelly. Not a glance back. Not an ounce of pity. I walked straight to the altar. The music swelled again. The people who truly loved me smiled through their tears, genuine, not false. The ceremony unfolded under the glowing afternoon sun. Daniel's voice trembled as he recited his vows. Ava, you are not just the love of my life. You are proof that courage and love can conquer anything. I choked up, replying, Daniel, you are my home. A place where I never have to fight to be loved again. Thunderous applause erupted as we kissed for the first time as husband and wife. In the front row, Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren clung to each other, their tears falling freely. I looked at them, my heart overflowing with gratitude. They were my real parents, not because of blood, but because they had chosen to love me unconditionally. The reception lasted well into the night. We danced under golden lights, ate wedding cake, and laughed beneath bursts of small fireworks lighting up the night sky. No one mentioned those who had once destroyed my childhood. No one needed to. Because with every smile, every hug, every heartfelt blessing, I knew I had truly left that past behind. Later that night, I sat with Daniel, under a canopy of green vines. He held my hand and whispered, "We'll build a family like that, Ava, a real one." I leaned my head against his shoulder and whispered back, "I know, because I learned from the best." And at that moment, I finally felt what I had yearned for all these years. Freedom, peace, and true love. From a little girl abandoned by her own mother on her birthday, Ava rose through the deepest heartbreaks to reclaim her worth. Thanks to the unconditional love of Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren, she built a new life. Full, independent, and brilliant. Today, Ava is no longer shackled by her past. She lives a life of her own choosing, filled with happiness, freedom, and the kind of real love that once was stolen from her. Now fully hers to keep. What do you think about Ava's journey? Would you have the strength to rise again after such losses? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family and life.